Hi all, let's have a look at another amazing game from the TCEC Season 17 Super Final. So this is round 28. In the previous rounds, Stockfish had the white pieces in the very same opening. Could Leela get revenge? Leela actually lost that game to a remarkably well-timed breakthrough move, G4 actually. If you want to check that, that was in round 27. So round 28, Leela playing white this time. So the Owen's defence being tested. And this seems to transpose into some kind of French defence style position. Here is the end of the book after knight f3. So Stockfish played c5, c3 knight f6, queen e2, d5, e5 knight fd7. You see it's got that French defence structure to it. Bishop f4, knight c6. This bishop is a bit of a problem piece though here. Potentially. We have h4, and Stockfish does a remarkably strange decision, I think, that most over-the-board players at least would be surprised by. Sometimes you want to keep this tension going, the whole concept of tension, to keep the pressure, to make sure that you're not giving the opponent a free hand, because if you play a move like c4, which was played, it kind of releases that tension. And this, you could think this is quite controversial in general. So the bishop dropped back. We have h6. With the pawn on h4, white doesn't have to worry so much about plans involving bishop e7 and g5 for some considerable time. In fact, the h-pawn has got another perk here. The rook can come in and sort of lock down. Sorry, I keep using the word lockdown, but we're talking about Leela positional games. Lock down the king side a bit. Watch out for this bishop in particular during this game. This is very, very interesting, this king side pressure that is seemingly persisting soon. So king f1, b5, king g1, a5, h5, and so the g-pawn is restrained. We have b4, so black's trying to get some sort of counterplay or asset over here. White's not playing ball though. White doesn't have to give black an active rook or anything. Doesn't have to take on b4. We have rook h3. So this rook is going to ig7 now, tying down black resources over there. Knight b6, rook g3. So black's a little bit tied down over here. There's also this kind of square h7. Sometimes if the rook's on g8, white might have a resource like bishop h7, or you can imagine queen h7. You'll see that later in some of the variations. So this is a bit tricky here. Bishop a6, the queen gets out of the x-ray there. Bishop b5, bishop d2. Pardon me. Okay, so rook a7, bishop e1, knight d7, b3. This is really, really interesting decision. Instead of keeping these queenside pawns kind of fixed here, it looks as though Leela wants to actually liberate the d-pawn. The d-pawn in particular, if that can be eventually liberated, there'll be a big threat of d5 with the king in the centre. If the king's really living in the centre, it'd be nice to try and open up the centre in principle. And this, you know, potentially is knocking on the door of this pawn chain to sort of say, I want to play c4 and d5 at some point. So b3, c takes, a takes, not minding, so wanting to play c4 to liberate the d-pawn, so not minding that there could be painful pressure on that c-file here. So in fact the pressure on the c-file is built up with queen c8 for a moment, but then queen b8, then rook c7, back to, you know, c-file potential pressure, knight e1, bishop a6, queen g4, bishop c8, knight d3, rook a7, bit of messing around. But we'll get to the position where that c-file pressure is accentuated here. So the rook in front of the queen. And is this causing regret now for white? As mentioned, I think part of the whole b3 thing, holistically, is to get to play d5 under certain circumstances. And these are pretty interesting now. Rook a2, knight b8, c4 now. So this is the point where it looks ridiculous, actually, doesn't it? c4 here. Is it to win material with bishop a4 to win an exchange? Or is it to liberate the d-pawn? Which is it? So a very, very interesting question. As I say, the king, you know, lives in the centre. In theory, it would be nice to open up the centre. And you also know, you know, sometimes the knight can come to f4 and support d5 as well. We have d takes, b takes, rook takes c4. But isn't it giving black two connected passed pawns. Isn't this a bit outrageous? And maybe Stockfish was very happy here and thinking after knight d2, I can even sacrifice back the exchange, who cares? Inviting bishop a4. But this is not the point. The point is to do with the d pawn. So knight f4 is played to try and, open up the king, basically in the centre. If white went into materialistic mode here with bishop a4, this only serves black, really. For example, here, and, winning that exchange, black's doing nearly fine. And in fact, if we look at this again, if maybe bishop takes, instead of that, knight takes, knight c4, white can't really claim that much. The two connected passed pawns are a good asset. So that's not really the idea of bishop a4. It's a technical possibility available, but not Leela's idea, it seems. Knight f4. So for the moment, though, it seems a little bit outrageous, giving these pawns and not using at least the material winning. That's not the point. It seems to be more about d5. So bishop d7, bishop d3. So quite carefully waiting for a moment, rook c1 is played. So a very interesting moment, this invasion of the rook, which creates a tactical liability. Rook c1 potentially, the bishop's eyeing c1 potentially. So why was this played, rook c1? It's a bit committal tactically, isn't it? But if we look at this position, say black plays rook g8, it seems actually a5 isn't so solid here. Knight b3, and how is black actually defending a5? So that's an issue. Rook h8, knight takes, defense very much. And if knight d5 instead, it seems knight e4, this position, where d5 is really evident with the king in the centre, here, d5. And this opens up the king. And in fact, now, knight df6, for example, shows, the king's, it's great to expose the king. If the rook ever moves, there's queen d6. If the rook moves off that third rank, queen d6 is checkmate. So this kind of thing is going to be fantastic for white. That'll be a fantastic position to demonstrate the concept of d5. So it seems there's method in the Leela madness, giving the two connected passed pawns actually, and it doesn't seem as though black's got that many options actually, which are lucrative. So this seems like a committal tactical decision. Rook c1. It's a bit of a tactical liability. The queen moves to e2, knight d5, and now we see actually Leela exploiting the tactics now here with a tactical move from Leela. You think, was this all anticipated or something from Stockfish? What's the tactical move do you think that Leela played here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video for 100 points. Okay, it reduces the worry of these two connected passed pawns by taking one of them out. Rook takes. After queen takes, the fork, knight d3, and the bishop is eyeing, c1. So taking here. So the king basically is still in the centre. These aren't so menacing as one pawn, not two connected passed pawns. That pawn is not so menacing, rather. So yeah, white seems to be doing very well, and black's still kind of restricted. The bishop still hasn't moved. In fact, this is move 40, and you'll see that the bishop doesn't even move for the next 30 moves. Spoiler alert, it's not going to move. Just look at these moves now. Knight c6, queen f3, knight e2. Okay, that bishop on f8 is frozen, and along with it, this rook's also not moving. The king side has been paralysed. But where is white's strategic break? Okay, knight takes e6 resolves resolves actually another issue in the position. This passed pawn, is it dangerous? It's actually locked down with bishop c4. A tactical move serving strategy to blockade the b pawn. So knight c7, bishop b3. So now it looks even less frightening, this pawn. So before it was the two connected passed pawns, and now it's a blockaded passed pawn. And the bishop's still hemmed in, and the rook's still hemmed in. We have queen c6, queen d1, king d8, bishop a4, queen e6, bishop c2, okay, and the king moves around. And you'll note these two pieces are like statues here in this game for a moment. But Leela doesn't seem to be doing anything that constructive. A bit of high-level shuffling until here, f4. So there is a spare pawn to push forward here for white, whilst there isn't really, it's not so easy for black. King b7, bishop d2. Okay, now f5. And now rook g4 holds against things like queen h4. It stops the use of queen h4, I guess. And now bishop e1. Okay, bishop h4. It seems the bishop, now that this pawn's blockaded, the bishop is controlling, statistically, e7 from that bishop. Queen c3, queen d1. f6 is played. Now this is a committal decision, which I felt was interesting, because it gives up control of g6 a bit more. You know, pawn on h6, g6 is given up a bit more, which means an entrenched rook can insert lateral pressure on black. If black had played queen c6, let's imagine the pawn's left on f6. In fact, white has f6 here. Leela has f6 herself, and if here there's a snag here, as mentioned before, if that h7 can be attacked soon with queen b1, it's a disaster. So there are snags associated with allowing white to play f6. So, you know, queen c6, f6. And if rook g8, queen b1 again, with this poking into h7 soon, after protecting the rook there, and that protects that rook. And that nasty pin, black's not really going anywhere, and going into h7. So you can see, it seems a point where a committal decision is enticed by white's pressure. So f6, and this begets more pressure now because of that g6 exerting lateral pressure potentially. So rook g6 is exerting lateral pressure now and pinning f6 to the queen right now. Okay, and now queen f3, and finally these two pieces start moving. This is towards move 70. The rook moves on move 68. A historic moment for the rook's history in this game, move 68. And in fact, even more exciting, now the bishop moves at move 70. So within two moves, just after move 68, they both move. They both say that they're still alive. Okay. Bishop e1, king b6, queen f2, queen f3. Bit more shuffling going on. King going up. And this is the point, you can use these games as a form of meditation because nothing seems to be going on. You can reach a tranquil state, not worry about anything. Just imagine being on the beach, clear blue sky, nice sandy beach. Just relaxing. Just getting into a large Stephen King novel, a story within a story within a story. On, say, page 300 out of 2000. And I did that once with the book It. There was quite a good film made of It, though, later. Yeah, I didn't get through It. Anyway, so here we see queen b5. Sorry, nothing that exciting. Okay, king g2. It carries on a bit. And carries on a bit. And it carries on a bit. And it carries on a bit. So, is there progress to be made? Here, actually, there's going to be a critically exciting moment where that B pawn, which has been blockaded, as Nimzovich says sometimes, restrain, blockade, and destroy. Can it be destroyed eventually? Is it a weak pawn potentially? Well, is the queen keeping that pawn alive indirectly? So this is a question I'm posing here because we get a position soon, very soon, very, very soon, here at move 120. You see, you didn't have to wait that long, where queen f3 is played. And if the queen, takes that pawn's potentially vulnerable to being munched, with bishop e1. So black actually played queen takes f3. So you might wonder why not keep the queens on the board? If here queen c6 was played, it seems as though white can put the queen here to lock down that rook and bring the rook to the c file rather sneakily, like this, for example. And you get this c file advantage, which, this is just a fictional example. Black starts cracking up, like can't keep the material. So, there's nasty things that could happen like that, I guess. Anyway, for whatever reason, deep tactical reasons, that might be one of them. the rook coming into the c-file after, you know, keeping the rook here locked up. So the queen's come off, and in a way it sort of indirectly weakens this pawn a little bit further, and black's still really tied down. Okay, so we have this check, the king goes over here, and that bishop attacks d5, tying down that knight, and this bishop is starting to work its way to the b pawn now. So the b pawn, is it feeling some vulnerability? Well, the king is also heading to the b pawn. So yes, it seems what I mentioned, that the queen was kind of an indirect guardian of that b pawn. Now that the queens are off, it means that the king can venture over to add more pressure to that b pawn. So it's a long-term liability, which the increasing liability of it is emphasized when the queens come off. You know, the king can be playing a very aggressive role. And you might think, well, okay, there's a conspiracy here. It's the king and the two bishops against this pawn. This is the one little pawn weakness, which could be the so-called exploitable weakness. Sometimes in chess, you know, you might get carried away. You might read, for example, Nimzovich, My System, and you go back to your own games and you think there's tons of weaknesses. And in fact, there's only one exploitable weakness. There's 5 weaknesses in theory, like double pawns, whatever. Well, there's only one exploitable weakness. Here it's the case that this might be the only exploitable weakness in black's camp, a significant one, and could cause, though, black's downfall. We have king b3, so the king is blockading that one weakness. Knight c7. There's also, well, you could argue there's another one as well. They're fragmented. As mentioned, you know, in theory, in general, fragmented pawns tend to fall off the board like ripe apples. So bishop c6 here, and now bishop d7, rook g6, and now the bishop, yeah, is starting to torture the pawn a bit more with the king. So yes, more and more pressure on that pawn. In fact, it looks as though, okay, after this attack on d4, which is parried with the rook, keeping the bishop and king in place, black seems to be on the edge now, on the boundary of losing material. Either this pawn or this pawn is going. After king a5, the torture rack seems to be stretching Stockfish out. Yeah, Leela's stretching Stockfish out on the torture rack here after bishop c6. And this reminds me of even early versions of Leela, you know, against GMs in speed players. Like, Leela puts opponents on a total torture rack. So here, is black going to lose material, though? Knight c7. At the moment, Stockfish is clinging on with dear life, with dear CPU, to the pawn on b4 and d5. You can see the bishops for white are really on full power now. We see e6. This pawn being used, e6, king b6, and yes, is something falling off after bishop d7? You might want to hold on a sec. At this moment, this critical juncture, was king b6 needed? Because isn't the king needed to hold b4? If knight b5, then bishop takes d5. Yeah, remember the rook's holding d4, so that's no problem. If bishop f8, then this rook can pounce back over this side of the board like we saw earlier quite quickly compared to that rook. It's got that extra little bit of flexibility to switch over now, and it could do naughty things. For example, like this, where it's conspiring on that c-file tactically and forcing the win of a pawn, or this kind of position, which is even worse, celebrating the fact that its fellow rook is trapped and can play rook e8, checkmating this bishop on e7. That's not a nice outcome for these guys, which patiently waited for 70 moves before they could move nearly. You know, 70 moves they had to wait for this? What sort of reward is that? Yeah. Okay, so king b6. Okay, so bishop d7 is played. Knight b5. And here, yes, losing material. Bishop takes b4. Something had to give. A pawn has been won. Does this spell the downfall of black, just losing this one pawn? The thing is, we still have these other problems from earlier. You know, locked down kingside, weak d5, knight d6, and now Leela actually Doesn't let that knight do anything more. It terminates that knight with bishop takes d6. We have king c2, king c7, king d3, king b7, bishop a4, bishop a3, and a bit of playing around here. Seems a bit sadistic, but okay, bishop f7, and then bishop g8 for fun, hitting that rook. And now e7, yes, there is something dramatic now happening. So threatening to queen with check if rook takes. So this dismantles this pawn chain. Now this pawn chain has been weakened at base. The base of the pawn chain has been undermined. You're supposed to undermine the pawn chains at their base generally, or exploitable base, whatever's more practical sometimes. But now, so f6 and h6 have been further weakened. And you'll note also that white has a breakthrough possibility, g4, g5 to use as well, potentially. So rook g6 pins f6 to the king for a moment. And g4, so this would mean that there's only hg available on g5. And we see that here, the king is having to hold the d5 pawn. So we see here bishop d6, g5. We see h takes g being used. If f takes g5, then f6. And there's an idea of f7 coming up. So f7 check. And for example here, what could happen here is quite horrible, I think, with basically the king coming up if needed, and playing rook e7 to queen this pawn, like in this scenario. So that could be a horrible scenario. So of fg, so this pawn basically, queening. So h takes is played. We have h6, bishop e7, and now h7. Wow, the rook has been imprisoned on h8. And this rook is free to play in the playground of the chessboard. So it comes to the c-file. On me. And now rook a6 jack, rook a7 jack, bit of playing around. The king now is more active than the black king. The black king has also now been restricted, and f6 ties down the bishop. It is rather sadistic. Another torture rack has been created, basically. So for Leela to explore the boundaries of black's defense in this torture rack. So, okay, the king is coming up, and if left unchecked, this king could just come in and munch the rook. So here we see king g6. Black's given up here. It would only be a temporary defensive with bishop f8. The rook can come to b8. So in fact, this is it. This is all over. King g6. And the rook's going to just be munched with king g7. It's over. Bar the shouting. g4 is played. Here, actually, bishop takes d5 permits the rook to move technically. Well, without having to sacrifice. King d6, bishop g2. Yes, this imminent king g7 now. The bishop blockades black's pass pawn, just in case. And a whole rook is being won now. And the rest, rook takes d4 simplifies neatly. Here, the game ended here. It's very easy for white to win this. White has to keep the f5 pawn. So Leela has to play a move like king g7 or king h7 for g6. So, for example, king g7 and king g6. And it's going to be zugzwang. And once this king moves, then f6 will drop. So, say g3, just zugzwang with bishop b7. Compulsion to move, and then take this pawn, and that's it. That's going to be it. Just queen this pawn. Sack the bishop if needed. Okay, so I'll take you to the game end. So what did we learn from this game? It's another classic game of Stockfish and the French defence. Maybe Stockfish somehow can't avoid, it seems, these tension-reducing moves like c4. The problem expertly highlighted, it seems, by Leela was that very, very deep move, I feel now, b3. It seems to, in the short term, imply I don't mind you having two connected pass pawns. It's not about me opening up, technically, a diagonal a4 to e8. It's more about me playing d5. And later, it seems, because the king was in the centre, and that started to become more evident about king safety issues, the two connected pass pawns became just one pawn. And throughout all of this, up to move 70, the black bishop and rook didn't do anything. And later there was a queen exchange, which meant the king could be a really aggressive piece coming to blockade that one b pawn. But it was also the black d pawn which didn't help. There were actually two weaknesses to kind of torture. This long torture rack process ended up winning a pawn. And all that, these pieces were still in prison for most of the game on the king's side. That bishop was just reverberating, and the rook was in prison for most of the game. So yeah, it's a really kind of vivid demonstration of torture rack positional play or something, to show, look, you really don't want to release the tension too quickly in general. That happens a lot in French defense games in human over the board chess. Sometimes players often release the tension at their peril. Their opponent is given a free hand. Like, it's, as someone mentioned on YouTube, it's like giving the opponent lots and lots of free moves, free tempo, if you release the tension too early. But it was a long, grinding torture rack process, I felt, in this game. One torture rack after another. So anyway, I hope for those positional players that like such torture, maybe you enjoyed it. Okay. There is beauty in the both in their different styles of play to be discovered and to be learned from. If you want to play me in a game, kingscrusher.tv. If you register at Chessworld, I'll be able to invite you for a game after, or bit.ly/Chessworld. There's also a suave chat forum, kingscrusher.tv/Discord. There's playlists at bit.ly/Leela Chess, also bit.ly/Stockfish Chess. There's bit.ly/Magnus Carlsen Chess. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.